All right, everybody, if we could take a seat. I know people are still streaming in because I know we're a bit down the hallway here, so people, I'm sure, are making their way, but let's get started. My name is Paul Andersen. I'm the Vice Chair of the ARIN Board. I'm filling in for John Curran, the President and CEO, who sends his regrets at the last minute. He was unfortunately able to travel. So welcome to the ARIN Public Policy Consultation. First question we just thought we'd ask is, could you put up your hand if this is your first time attending either an ARIN PPC or a PPM? Don't be shy. Oh, quite a few. All right, well, that's good to know that we have some new faces. So ARIN, as you know, is the organization that assigns for the North American region ARIN number of resources. And we assign those and allocate those resources based on community-developed process. And that community-developed process is done through what we call our policy development process. Hopefully all of you picked up a discussion guide that's available there in the back, and if you haven't already, maybe just grab one, because that has all the policies that we're going to discuss today, and also has this great flowchart on page 15, which if you're new and aren't familiar with the policy process, just gives you at a quick glance how we develop policies at ARIN. One of the important functions of the policy process is the advisory council, and that's why we're really here today. The advisory council is an elected member body of 15 volunteers from the community who help move forward policies that have been proposed by the community. They, effectively make sure this process is followed and work on the community's behalf to develop good technical and sound policies. And one of the reasons we're here today is to get operator feedback into our policies. So, without further ado, there's about 7 policies currently in the chute, but we'll be discussing only 4 today. Again, they're all in the discussion guide if you want. A few notes before we get started. I've already kind of covered that. This is an open public discussion, so anybody who's in this room is entitled to speak, make comment. Please feel free. It's very important because your input is invaluable in developing these policies. We'd also like to note and welcome our remote participants listening out there. So there is remote participants. That's why it's very important that if you are going to speak, that we ask that you approach a mic so you can be heard. There's also a live transcript, and there's a chat room. So for those that are remote, if you do want to ask a question, you can just do so in the chat room, and it'll be read out here by Kevin Bloomberg, seated up here at the head table. Just a few rules and reminders when we do get into the policy discussions that I will, as the chair of the meeting, moderate all discussions, make sure everyone can be heard. It's very important that you do speak your name and an affiliation so that you can be recognized. And please, we ask that you comply with our rules and courtesies, which you can find in the discussion guide. Today up here with me as myself, I'm Paul Andersen. We have Dan Alexander, who's the Advisory Council Chair, Kevin Bloomberg, the Advisory Council Vice Chair, and Leslie Nobile, who's with ARIN staff. And as you can see also up at the head table, we have our jabber machine, so all our remote participants are sitting right there in the middle of the table. So we've got a few things we're going to discuss today. Leslie's first going to give us a status of the IPv4 free pool, a hot topic these days. Dan will come and give us a report on the current Advisory Council activities. As I said, we're going to discuss 4 draft policies. And then another item, which, by the way, just for those that usually do attend, we are going to have one special topic. We'd like to take some time to discuss the future of these ARIN public policy consultations. So Mike is indicating his hand in support. So if you do have some time, please stick around. We'd love to get your input. And with that, I would like to invite Leslie to come up and give the V4 depletion as I try and get it up. No clicker,
just this? Okay, cool. Hey, everyone. My name is Leslie Nobile. I have a very quick update on the status of IPv4 depletion at ARIN. As you know, we are getting very close. So I'm going to talk a little bit about changing dynamics. This is the stuff we're seeing with IPv4 depletion. Lots of different behaviors, lots of different things going on. One of the big things with depletion is that we did an IPv4 countdown plan, and we phased it in 4 phases. And each phase had different processes and procedures, and we got a little, tighter on the way we review requests the closer we got to depletion. So in phase 4, all of our IPv4 requests are being team reviewed, which means that they're being reviewed in the order they're received, and they're being reviewed by more than one set of eyes so that we always have an objective, sort of objective people looking at each request and making sure there's consensus on the way to move forward with each request. We think that's the fairest way to proceed, given impending depletion. So that has actually slowed down our processing quite a bit. I think our SLA is a 2-day response time, and I think we're on a 4 to 5 day response time right now. One of the reasons that we are so slow at this point is because we've started seeing a real increase in IPv4 request traffic, particularly in the last few weeks. We've got several hundred requests sort of in some state, some pending state right now. So things are a bit slower. Also, with before depletion, we have a new customer profile. We have first-time people coming to ARIN, brand new customers who know nothing about ARIN, who would typically have gone to an upstream ISP for space, but we're seeing a lot of upstream ISPs telling their downstream customers, go to ARIN. There's a policy where you can get your own /24. We want to keep a hold of our own space because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. So you go to ARIN and get your own. So we're dealing with lots of first-timers, doing a lot of education, a lot of hand-holding, and just, that's sort of slowing things down a little bit as well. Additionally, we already have an increased workload, but we expect that to increase quite a bit more, and that's mostly due to the transfer market. We expect when we deplete, which should be sometime in the near future, like the next month maybe, we're going to have a lot more transfers going on, and a lot of the transfers are going to be market transfers of legacy space that's been sitting in the ARIN database since before ARIN's inception, space that we inherited from the internet. And a lot of that legacy, those legacy registrations are stale. The data is old. So we're going to be doing a lot of chain of custody, verification and vetting on that kind of space. And additionally, a lot of it, as I said, is stale. So some of it is going to be in some company name that was bought or sold 5 or 10 years ago. So a lot of these people it's going to be a 2-step process. They're going to have to do an 8.2 merger and acquisition transfer first, and then they'll proceed to do that 8.2 market transfer. So that's going to definitely increase the workload. So our current IPv4 inventory. We've got 2 categories. We've got what's available and what you see on the website, and then we have sort of other inventory. So the available inventory right now stands at 0.15/8 equivalents. This is space that's not being routed, that's being issued, ready to go. Let's see, there was something I wanted to say about it, but I forget. Anyway, so that's what we're issuing from right now. Then we have other inventory that you don't see, and there's sort of 2 categories. We have our quarantine space, and this is space that we get back due to returns, voluntary returns, which we do get, or revoked space that we revoke due to non-payment of registration fees. So we hold that space for 60 days to clear filters, and then we check the routing, and then we will reissue the space. We'll actually reissue it. We'll put it back in inventory and reissue it. Some of the space is actually still being routed, and we will take that space and put it back at the bottom of the pile in a 60-day hold. But at some point, we're going to have to start issuing that space because we're almost down to nothing, and we're going to have to start issuing everything we have. I think people are going to sort of demand it. Let's see. Besides the quarantine space, the space that's automatically released at 60 days, we have what we call reserved space, and that's put on indefinite hold, and it's typically reserved for policies. There's 2 policies right now that we're holding space for. One is dedicated IPv4 block to facilitate IPv6 depletion, and we put aside a /10 per the policy for IPv6 facilitation. We've issued a single /24 from that /10, so it's quite a bit of space sitting there, and it will stay there unless the policy changes. We also have a /16 set aside for the microallocation policy, and that's for critical internet infrastructure. And there's 218 /24s remaining in that space, and again, that space will stay there, and it's specifically reserved for policy. There's actually a second /16 that is going to be reserved for the microallocation policy. I think we're putting that policy into effect in June. We're implementing it. So we'll put aside a second /16. We'll pull it from somewhere in here and put it in reserve indefinitely for this policy. And additionally, we've got 8 /16 equivalents that we've put in this reserved indefinite hold space until we can do further research. And this was space that we reclaimed due to fraud or hijackings. And it needs quite a bit of chain of custody research. It takes a long time to find out whether these businesses are still, or whether they've been dissolved, or whether they went to bankruptcy, or whether there's a successor company. There's a lot of research that has to be done. So we're still sort of working on these 8/8s, doing the research. I actually have a project where I'm researching all of that. So some of these may move over into our available inventory as soon as we clear these up. So on our website, we list the block size distribution of our remaining IPv4 inventory. So on our homepage is the total amount of space in the inventory, and if you click on the link on the front, it'll take you to this and shows how many prefixes we have left. So we're down to almost nothing, especially in the larger blocks. We've got a /11, /15, a /16, and a /17. And other than that, everything is the smaller blocks. So it could be that /11 will be broken up in order to issue qualifies, maybe a /12 request or a /13 request. We're not sure yet, but it's likely that that will be broken into smaller blocks. What do I want to say about this? You'll note that we've got over 500 /24s. At this point, ARIN mostly issues /23s, 24s, some 22s, but we're issuing a lot of smaller blocks. So we still have, quite a few, but once we get rid of those larger blocks, I think that the request traffic is going to increase, and we'll go through those smaller blocks rather quickly. Okay, so I mentioned our inventory. It changes daily. It shows what's available, but that's not really an accurate picture of what we have. If you want to really see all the space that ARIN has, you can go to our extended FTP stats, and there's a link at the bottom of this page. And this really tells you exactly what ARIN has. It tells you what all of the RIRs have, in fact. It was a joint project. We all worked on this together. It was for accountability, transparency, and it basically shows which RIR is responsible for which resources. And it identifies, it's a way for us to identify inconsistencies and overlaps, which when we first did this project, there were a few inconsistencies and overlaps. Some RIRs were claiming space that another RIR had in their database. So we cleared all that up, and it's a really good way of accounting, basically. So it is a daily snapshot of all ARIN issued resources, everything that we've issued that day and previously, all of our available resources, and then all of our reserved resources. And a couple of notes on this. So on the previous slide, I had other inventory, and it was broken into a couple of categories, quarantine and reserved. All of the other inventory from the previous slide shows up as reserved on the extended FTP stats. So if you're actually looking at the extended FTP stats, quarantine and reserve is going to be in there. The other thing to note is that 8.3 transfers, those are the market transfers, the specified transfers, they're going to show up as issued. If there's an 8.3 transfer completed on any one day, it's going to show up as issued as new space. Basically, it's going to a new company. However, 8.2 transfers, which are merger and acquisition transfers, we made a business decision to retain the original issue date on those, so they're not going to show up as issued. So if you do an 8.2 transfer, it won't show up as issued. I think that's all I have on that slide. So we get asked this question, once you hit 0, is that the end of it? Will you ever be able to increase your space again? And the fact is we will. We're going to count down. We're going to get all the way to 0 probably in the next month or two. And then we're going to have bits and pieces coming back. So our inventory is going to go up and go down. It's not going to go up a lot, but it will go up and down. And there's 4 ways that addresses come back into ARIN's free pool, and that is through voluntary returns, which amazingly enough we are still getting. When we do get returns, we tell people, we send them email and we say, you have an option. You don't have to return it. It's nice that you're doing this, but you have an option to transfer this space via this policy if you're interested. And people still give it back. They want to be good netizens, so we do get voluntary returns. We are continuing to revoke space for non-payment. We have a very long process for non-payment and for revocations. And I think it goes to over 180 days, back and forth. We send lots of emails and certified mail, et cetera, trying to find people to pay the bills. And eventually, after 180 days, we will revoke the space. So some of it does come back, some of it does get paid for eventually. We will continue to reclaim space due to fraud, violation of the Registration Services Agreement, or business dissolution. When we find a business is completely gone, there are times that we will take that space back. What we've found is a lot of the legacy space that sat in the database for a long time and wasn't being routed was being hijacked. Lots and lots of spammers just target that space, they take it, they start routing it and using it. So when we find stuff like that going on, we will actually pull the space out of the database. And that's some of the space I told you that's in inventory that still needs some additional research. Our fourth way is from IANA. IANA issued space. And believe it or not, we are still getting space from IANA. Per a global policy. It's called Post-Exhaustion IPv4 Allocation Mechanisms by IANA. And basically, it's a policy that allows IANA to issue to the RIRs any bits and pieces that they have left. Previously, they could only issue the RIRs /8s. This policy allows them to issue in equal amounts, whatever space they have left, twice a year to the RIRs. So far, we've each received 3 allocations. We've got a /11 in March or May or whatever of 2014. We got a /12 in September of 2014 and a /13 in March of 2015. And we're due for our next allocation in September. So it's March and September that we typically get these. IANA still does have some space, so we will get our next allocation. It's probably going to be a /14, but I'm not positive. The space that they have right now is space that the RIRs returned to them. So they had little bits and pieces, but we, mostly the 3 large RIRs, APNIC, RIPE, and ARIN, returned 1.21, 1.22/8s in total to the IANA a couple of years ago. So that's the space they're issuing to us currently. And just as a side note, ARIN has recovered 3.54 total /8s since 2005, and that's via reclamations, returns, and revocations. So space does come back. It's much slower now, but we anticipate still getting space back. So that's all I have. Are there any questions?
Questions for us? If you don't mind coming to a mic, just so our remote participants can.
Is there going to be a slide? Are the slides going to be published?
Yes.
Okay.
Leslie?
Yeah. I did not. I can talk about it. Real quickly, Dan asked me to mention the waiting list. So all of the other RIRs have what we call austerity policies, last /8 policies, where when they got to their last /8, they would only issue a single /22 to organizations. ARIN has no such policy. We don't have a real /8 policy, a real last /8 policy. So we're going to issue all the way down to 0. But what we do have is a policy called waiting list for unmet requests. So you noticed, and I'm going to just go back if I can, to our prefix sizes. So for example, if a company comes in next week and qualifies for a /10, right? We don't have a /10. We're going to, the waiting list will kick in. We'll basically say you can accept a smaller block. What's the smallest block size you will accept? And if they're willing to accept the /11, we'll issue the /11. But if they say, no, we would rather wait till a /10 comes in, they can go on something called a waiting list. We anticipate that starting anytime now, like maybe in the next week. So we're kind of preparing for it. We're ready. We've got all of our software in place and all of our procedures in place. But that is going to happen very soon. So you will have an option to take a smaller block or be put on a waiting list and hope that space comes back. So just, yeah. Kevin? Ouch.
There, much better. Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, NAC. I just wanted to ask Leslie, you talked about the waiting list. So in some of the other regions, they would give out aggregate blocks. So if you needed a /10, they would give you a bunch of it, an 11, a bunch of 14s, a 16, and sort of slap it all together and give you an aggregate. In the ARIN region, that doesn't apply. It's you get one block of the correct size if that size doesn't exist. Is that correct?
That is correct. Our policies require us to issue single prefixes. We cannot issue multiple prefixes to satisfy a request. So we can't combine, a 10 and 11 or a, two 16s to make a 15. It's got to be a single prefix. So, yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Next, I'll invite Dan to come up and give the AC report as I quickly switch over to it here for him. Minor, is it C or C underscore? I'm going to go with the one updated today. hopefully the right slides.
I think so. Hello, all. So, as Paul mentioned earlier, the Advisory Council, we're a 15-member body that were elected by the community to act as that facilitator of managing policy proposals or suggested changes for the Board of Trustees of ARIN. There's 15 of us, and you can see in the picture it was a little cold. This was January when we all met in DC, so we tried to take this picture quick. But here in the room today is actually Scott Libran, John Springer, Kevin, and myself, and Tina. Save the best for last.
Good save, good save.
The purpose of the AC is to help facilitate that change. And because a lot of times for the people who raise their hand at the beginning that are kind of new to all this, you sometimes see on the mailing list or these conversations, well, ARIN does this and ARIN does that. And in reality, ARIN actually just follows the rules that the community agrees upon. So somebody in the community or elsewhere will say, you know what, the way these resources are managed, we think we should do it this way. And that results possibly in a policy proposal. And then it becomes the task of the Advisory Council to make sure that that fits the guidelines of actually becoming an actual policy. So we need to make sure that it's fair and impartial, technically sound, and it's actually supported by the community. And then once we actually cultivate all of that into something that we think we can reach consensus, it's then forwarded onto the Board of Trustees to actually become a policy. And in the end, ARIN, as in the staff, all they're really doing is implementing all the policies that we come together and make. So right now, there are 7 proposals submitted so far this year. 22 were actually submitted last year. Today we've got 4 that we're going to talk about, and we have an additional 3 that we have not actually yet moved on to a draft status where we have clarified that these are something that we're going to actually work on. So in order to advance these 4 drafts, we're going to talk about them here today, and the whole reason we're here is actually to get this room's feedback and opinions, because as network operators, it's actually a very valuable perspective for the Advisory Council to hear, because we look at different things like the mailing lists. ARIN has their public policy meetings twice a year as well, but to actually be in this forum is extremely valuable for the Advisory Council to hear these different perspective. So the 3 proposals that are brand new were just recently submitted, so they're in the initial review process and they're not going to be talked about here. But just to touch on them briefly, one of the proposals we worked on last year, we actually abandoned because people couldn't come to a complete agreement as to how that should be managed. But when the Advisory Council abandoned it, we said it's still a valuable topic, so we wanted to continue working on it. So it's actually coming back in a new version, and it discusses how ARIN allocated resources might be used outside of the region. There's also another proposal to consider the utilization of those resources outside of the region. And a third is how to simplify the needs requirements for V4 resources when they're transferred. So we're going to be reviewing these 3 proposals at our next meeting, and at the joint NANOG ARIN meeting in October, if we accept these, they'll likely be discussed there. So one of the other areas where we actually get feedback from, in addition to the community, is ARIN provides a staff and experience report at the ARIN meeting, and it basically provides feedback to us based on all of the calls that they field from registration services, all the applications that are being made from different people. And they provide us, some feedback as far as lessons learned and problems that they're seeing out coming in from the community as potential changes that we could make to policy to help people out. 4 of the items that they mentioned on the last experience report were POC validations, how 8.2 transfers are dealt with due to a company's reorganization, and experience with /24s, which we recently changed the policy as far as how we lowered essentially the minimum assignment down to a /24 for both ISPs and end users. So they're gaining experience as to how that's being implemented. And there was also an immediate need topic that we're looking at as well. Any of these topics, if someone in the room have an interest or would like to find out more, definitely reach out to any of us after this session, or even if we have time during the open discussion at the end, we could possibly even bring those back up and talk about. So, some of the other work that the Advisory Council is looking at is one of the things that Paul mentioned at the beginning when we're talking about the agenda. We've had a couple of these sessions here at a NANOG meeting and got a lot of feedback, and the AC has been talking with the program committee as well about how can we improve these sessions, because there's different opinions of how useful these are, or can we change the format to facilitate better feedback, or is there information that the NANOG community would like to see from ARIN that would help them understand how these proposals or these ARIN policies impact your day-to-day work, how you manage resources. So that was one of the key things that we wanted to reserve some time at the end of this session to have kind of an open dialogue, and as the AC gain a little better input from everyone here in the room as to how we can improve this format. One of the other topics that we're looking at is one of the common ways when we're all in a room meeting and we're talking about these proposals, we get a sense of the room, everybody raise your hand, how do you feel about this kind of a change? And that's somewhat limiting because it's restricted to who's in the room and who may be online at the time of remote participation, but it's not a very wide reflection of the wider community. So the AC is looking at different ways that we could reach possibly a better or a broader audience to gain feedback on some of the changes that we're making, whether that's online polling. The third piece is the Network Resource Policy Manual simplification. One thing we commonly hear is this thing is really complicated. We've got a policy for this, that, and the other, and there's so much language that you have to hire a consultant to try and sort out. And why can't we just make this easier, where we come and ask for resources, or we ask for an update, and staff will just take care of that. So we're looking at different ways that we could possibly simplify this policy manual, make it easier to understand. And also we're looking at the fact that, as Leslie pointed out, the ARIN's free pool is just about done. So much of the policy manual, a lot of the policies written in there are based on people coming to ARIN and getting an allocation from the free pool. Well, what happens in a post-depleted world when that's not so relevant? Can a lot of the policies, do they still maintain their relevance, or should we just possibly have policy discussions to maybe do away with them? So that's another thing that the advisory council is looking at. And that's the current state of some of the things that we're dealing with.
Any questions for Dan?
Any questions?
All right, thank you, Dan. Okay, so since we have some new bodies, just to remind you what we're going to do, we're going to now go through the 4 policies, spend about 15 minutes each. A member of the advisory council is going to come up and give a quick overview of the policy. For those following along, the first thing we're going to do, you'll find on page 5 of your discussion guide. As I said before, you can kind of get a concept of the PDP on page 15. And for those not familiar, on page 17, the NRPM that Dan was mentioning has what is the current policy. So with that, we'd like to do ARIN draft policy 2015-1, modification to criteria for IPv6 initial end user, and ask Scott Librand of the AC to come up and give a presentation, after which point we'll have some discussion. Thanks.
Greetings, welcome. So the problem statement here is fairly simple. We have a pretty good IPv6 policy that allows for a lot of people to get space for whatever they need it for. There is, however, one class of users for whom getting space directly from ARIN is not allowed currently, and for whom getting space from their upstream or doing a number of other things that would otherwise be options would introduce a need to renumber their network when they change things, and that would be cost prohibitive for them, and therefore it would be advantageous to everyone if we made it easier for those users to get space. Those users are, those organizations are networks that have a minimum of 13 active sites. So the idea here is that these sites would have to be in a contiguous network. They would have, as I said, have to have at least 13 sites, and that would get them a /40 under existing policy, so that would be the threshold for getting a block directly from ARIN as opposed to an upstream. The idea behind that threshold is largely because there's a cost to all of us as network operators of carrying that prefix in the table. So we don't want just anybody to be able to get a network for any reason, but it would be useful for these networks to be able to get space if they're that large. So what are we talking about here? What kind of network is this? An example would be an organization with 50 locations, 10 staff each on average, 20 devices, voice and data subnets. They're not multi-homed, and in IPv4 land, they're using 10 space and NAT. In IPv6 land, we don't really want them to use NAT6. We don't really want them to have to multi-home because they have one provider that's providing their IPVPN. That's great. BGP multi-homing in this case would be wasteful. And the other option under existing policy would be to have them just go ahead and get an IPv4 block, because if they got a v4 block, then they would qualify for a v6 block. Well, if they can get by with the PA space that they've got, not get a new block from ARIN, and just go straight to v6 for their ARIN issued space, that would be great. So we want to make that possible. So this is a fairly simple constrained use case. I can go into more details if you want, but since we have a limited amount of time, I thought I'd breeze through that and see if anyone has any questions, comments, support. Do you think it's too loose, too strict? Do you wonder what in the world are you even talking about? I want to get it straight open for questions. This was not very controversial last time I presented it, so we'll see if anybody has any comments here.
So please approach a microphone, sorry sir, because we do have remote participants, and of course if you are on the remote, feel free to ask a question and we will read it in queue. Again, if you're in this room or hearing the sound of my voice, you are entitled to participate. Sometimes it's useful even if you can just come up and say, I think that's a good idea or a bad idea. It's any input's helpful. Sir, name and affiliation.
Yeah, Bill Goldstein, retired AT&T product manager in internet services, but my affiliation is myself right at this point. Some of this information is interesting. I was dealing with these issues just before I retired, and I've got to think maybe find a way to get some of this to some of the friends in that group that I was dealing with so they might address this. The one thing that concerns me for ARIN is the addresses are now rightfully or wrongly considered property of certain organizations, in mergers, acquisitions, even in bankruptcies. And, they're being traded. And I just, my concern is that ARIN has adequate legal counsel, so if you're in a situation where you're saying, no, you can't do that, or something that doesn't belong, and somebody has, perhaps a large corporate sponsor who thinks differently, that, this organization, which, does an absolutely essential service, but, is not, does not have the agendas that, some others do, is protected.
Sorry, I'm having, as it relates to this policy?
Well, not only this policy, but a lot of what you've been going over in general, is as far as, who owns IP addresses, who can transfer them, how they're transferred, et cetera.
Okay, well, we'll have to just, right now, unfortunately, discussion is focused just on this policy, but.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
But we can have comments offline if you want later on that.
Well, again, it doesn't, affect me, directly. But,
Understood.
I worry, I've seen and heard enough stuff go on in my experience in this industry to worry that, some entities, because of their resources, may try to take advantage.
No, understood, but we're just,
Okay.
at this
That's fine.
time,
That's
just talking about this policy. Thank you, though, sir. Any other comments or questions on this policy? Kevin, remote participant?
Yeah, we have a remote participant from Gary Burmester, no affiliation, speaking for himself. Am I correct that once the IPv6 space was assigned via this change, that having IPv6 would now justify being able to obtain IPv4 numbers out of the reserved transition block?
Did you hear it? Because I had a hard time.
I heard the question. I think what he's asking is, does getting V6 under this policy then allow you to get V4 space under, I believe it's 4.10, the V6 transition space? I think that would probably be a question for Leslie, but if she doesn't know the answer, I'll look at the text and see if I can figure it out on the fly.
Any other questions or comments? Because that might just take a second to.
So 4.10 actually says that you can get a small IPv4 block in order to facilitate your transition to IPv6. So if you need it in order to implement IPv6, you can get the IPv4 block, not the opposite way, which it seems like he's asking.
Okay.
So.
If he wants to respond, type while we're waiting. Any other comments? People just want to say, as it relates to this policy, that they're in favor or against? Front microphone.
Mike Joseph, Google. I support this policy. I think that we need to make sure that we don't raise the bar too high for V6 adoption, and this seems like a sound way to get there.
Thank you, Mike. Other comments? Again, it's very helpful just to get, I support, I don't support.
So 2 things.
Yes, go ahead.
From Gary, thank you, that answers my question.
Okay.
So he was happy with that. And I actually have a question, Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I run a much smaller provider, and I have customers who 13 sites is a big deployment. In the V4 world, you could almost say that the number of sites could be significantly smaller. You could have 1, 2 sites. As an end user, you needed 50 to 100 IPs in use to get going and get your first allocation. So right now, you need 2,000 addresses within 12 months. This policy is trying to say, or 13 sites. And I guess my question for the community and what I would like to see is something a little more realistic for what we would actually define as a small end user case. I think people have a problem with 1 or 2 or 3 because that would just be too many routes in the table. But if a company has 5 sites, why would they be excluded from getting IPv6 today? This policy, I think, has a very good use case, but I think it can be expanded to allow a decent number more by lowering the 13.
Scott wants to respond?
Yeah, one follow-up question to that. What do you see as the level of renumbering burden for getting provider assigned space in like the 5-site case? Because the problem statement of this particular proposal is that for organizations with 13 or more sites, the renumbering burden is just too high. and it justifies putting another route into the table to allow them space. Where do you think that crossover point is?
I would say that the burden of renumbering when you're a company with 3 people is the same as the burden when you're a company of 15 people, i.e. if you have 13 sites and you have 13 employees, the burden is probably equivalent to a smaller company that has less employees and less ability to deal with it. The burden of renumbering is not my issue. The issue for me is that these are companies who are asking, pleading with the community to have globally unique IPs that are not tied to any one specific provider. And what we're now doing is we're specifying the size to exclude what I would consider to be small organizations. So
I'm trying to figure out if this is a modification to this policy that we're proposing or a new policy idea that would expand things further.
I'm just saying that the number 13 could be a smaller number and would allow the use case to expand to a larger group of
I would love to hear, this is the first feedback I've heard on whether the 13 is the right number. I would love to hear more feedback from the community on whether that's the right place.
13, good number, bad number? Come up.
Jason Parsons, Saffron Solutions. I think 13 is a bad number.
Do you have a counter proposal?
Recognizing that any number is going to be inherently arbitrary, I agree with Kevin's observations that I'm a consultant. My client base is primarily smaller enterprises. The burden of renumbering for them is high. Their networks have a significant deal of complexity, but would largely be under the 13 number. So it feels a little bit arbitrary to me, although I recognize that any number is a little bit arbitrary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Mike Joseph, Google, again. I'm not taking a position on a number, but I would say that I think as a community we need to be cautious about recognizing an unfunded transfer of costs. While small entities might have a larger burden of their budget spent with renumbering, remember that if we simply gave every entity of any size IPv6 PI space, then every other network on the planet now has to carry those prefixes and bear those costs. So I do think we need to remember that we can't really weigh this as the impact just on the entity affected. We have to strike a balance because, you know, while it may be unfortunate for you to have to renumber, it's unfortunate for me to have to carry your prefixes because you won't.
Thank you. I'm going to close the microphones unless somebody wants to approach now. So we'll close the microphones. Microphone closed unless there is a remote participant squeezing in, Kevin? No. Okay. Thank you very much for the feedback on this. The AC appreciates it. So I will now slide us into the next slide deck here and invite Tina Morris to come up and present Draft Policy ARIN 2015-2, a proposal to modify 8.4 Inter-RIR transfers to specified recipients. We're just on arrow key today.
Okay.
Get my timer out of the way.
No problem. So, ARIN 2015-2, if you follow PPML, you've probably seen a lot of chatter about that lately. This was a proposal David Huberman and I put together to simplify the 8.4 transfer policy and allow space, basically, if you transfer it in, you can transfer it out. Currently, when you go and request space, you request a 24 via the transfer market. So you've gone and you've justified internally that you need space, you've found a source, and you've transferred it in, you can get a 24-month supply. Within that 24 months, the first 12 months, you cannot transfer it out of the ARIN region. We found that to be a problem sometimes because business changes in that first 12 months, and you may need to do something outside of the ARIN region. One example that's gotten a lot of attention is work in China, where you need to transfer the space to that region. The current ARIN policy does not allow that to happen. So what we proposed was changing the bullet just simply to remove the word transfer. So the transfer policy still applies to allocations and assignments, cannot be transferred within 12 months. But if you've transferred a block in, you can also transfer a block out within that 12 months. The comments on PPML have gone many different directions, so I don't have examples of that yet. I will have them at the next meeting. Basically, I just wanted to kind of circle back to the root of why we came to this point was when you go internally to the transfer market, you have to justify a lot of things. You have to justify a very large dollar spend to your corporation. You have to justify to ARIN that you are going to grow and you're going to need these addresses for the 24 months. It's not an easy task. It's not taken lightly. But it also doesn't allow any flexibility. So if further down the road your company comes to you and says, we want to launch an entity in China, and you've just done your justification, you've spent all your dollars, and you don't have any more dollars in the bank, or there aren't IP addresses to take and open that new entity, you are stuck, and you cannot, you have to circumvent ARIN policy at this point to do it. And that's not the best way. So what we were proposing was that, just to make this more of a formal policy. And it's gone on some tangents with global policy, and maybe that's the way to go, but I wanted to get feedback from this community before and just see where we go with it.
All right. Comments, questions, discussion on this proposal? Sir?
Yeah, Kevin Locke with Carpathia. Unless I'm missing something here, why is it necessary to, if you're moving your business to China, to transfer to, I'm assuming, APNIC?
So there's, and we keep using China as an example because it's the harshest example. When you route in China, your space has to be assigned to APNIC. So you cannot keep it in the ARIN registry and still use it in China and route it in their databases. They just simply don't allow that.
Okay.
So with this policy, as it stands right now, you can't move that space for 12 months. And that limitation can be hard for some companies.
I mean, in that case, assuming there is a good technical reason like that, obviously the role of the RIRs is to keep a database that's updated as, as correctly as possible. So I don't see any problem transferring it to another RIR that will keep it up to date.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Matt Petak, Yahoo. So I'm guessing that you're really thinking of V4 number resources in this particular case, since you should be able to get V6 resources in China with no problems.
Yes.
And one of the things as a community that we've talked about over the past, I think it's coming up on almost a decade now, as we thought about V4 run out, is did we want a gradual landing, or did we really want people to move towards V6? And I think I'm going to channel my inner Marty Hannigan here on the rearranging deck chairs on the sinking Titanic in shuffling blocks around the world. I would say, why don't people just start pushing more V6 and moving in that direction rather than taking ever smaller chunks of V4 space and dicing them up around the planet? So I am not in favor of this.
Not in favor? Okay. Thank you. Far microphone.
Joe Provo, Google. In general, needs a little work. There's some concern that there's room for abuse. So some protection against flipping would be desirable. I can channel one of my colleagues, Mr. Schiller, who would propose a list of compatible registries that have equal anti-flipping language within their policies, so that those would be the registries with which we could implement this policy.
So do you think this is a good problem to be solved, just maybe this isn't quite the solution yet?
Correct.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Phil Rosenthal from IS Prime. So while I appreciate the, yes, V6 is the future and things should move that way, unfortunately, I don't see it that's going to happen in a short time frame, and we're going to have to deal with V4 as it is. If people have addresses that they're not efficiently using in one region and they can efficiently use them in another region, I think it's certainly better to encourage them to do that rather than to use up more addresses in another region and create even more, of a shortage. So I am in favor.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come and just give either a short or a long comment of their view on this, either the proposal or even just whether, as I said earlier, the problem itself is something solved, but maybe you have concerns over the language? Sir?
So, Kuram Bajwa from Wipro Data Center Services. So IPv6 is out, IPv4 is out, right? But there are organizations that are sitting on a huge IPv4 space, right? Reassigning or assigning, if ARIN is doing anything to reclaim those IPs back, or no, that pretty much stays?
So that's a little bit, again, out of this policy.
Yeah,
This is just dealing with transfers. But maybe at the end of the policy block, we can address that a little bit. Other comments or questions that people want to make on this policy? Okay, we'll close the microphones. Kevin, just checking to see nothing. All right, thank you very much, Tina. Thank you very much for the input on this policy. Thank you, everybody. Moving right along here.
I guess there's a delay in the...
There is a little bit of delay in the webcast, so please feel free to read it in.
Okay, so Kevin Ott, not seeing IPv6 happening in a short time frame, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more crutches we keep using to keep V4 alive defers IPv6 deployment. We can't postpone the pain forever.
Thank you for that comment. Okay, we will move on now to our third proposal. We're making great time here. 2015-3. Sorry, I did not queue it up there. Today, John Springer will be presenting it, and it's to remove the 30-day utilization requirement in end-user IPv4 policy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'm presenting today for David and Leif, who couldn't be here, to remove a proposal to remove the 30-day utilization requirement in end-user IPv4 policy. So the end-user policy is intended to provide end users with a one-year supply of addresses. Qualification is subject to a number of terms, one of which is that the operator needs to use at least 25% of the addresses within the first 30 days. The author submits that this is an unrealistic expectation and proposes that we remove it. Text wall, essentially there are that's the contents of section 433 right now. If you go to that in your manual, you'll notice that it doesn't say 25% immediate utilization rate. That figure is supplied in 4216 on page 22 of the NRPM. So, but the reference is what is proposed to be removed in this case. And by removing that one clause, you end up with a remaining 50% utilization rate within 1 year. Justification, it often takes longer than 30 days to stage the equipment and start actually using addresses. I would say that's more common than not, actually. Growth not being regimented, the forecast is to use X addresses over the course of the year, not 25% within 30 days. And this policy text applies to additional address space requests. It's incompatible with the requirements of other additional address space request justification, which indicates that 80% utilization of existing space is sufficient. And the reason we're here is to solicit operator input on the matter. So let's have some.
I once again welcome you to come to the microphone. Don't all race at once. No, seriously, please come up. Sarah, go ahead.
Matt
if you could
Petak,
re-identify yourself.
from Yahoo. I'm lucky sometimes if I can get legal review on signatures for contracts in 30 days. I wholeheartedly agree with let's get rid of 30 days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Joseph, Google. While I support the idea behind this policy, I do oppose it as written. I think simply striking the 25% requirement doesn't address some of the issues, particularly as they were brought up on PPML, regarding making sure that we're not looking purely at a speculative request from an Insight that may have no relationship prior with ARIN. I think some interesting ideas were mentioned on PPML. I think some of those may have merit, but the policy as written, simply removing this requirement is not sound in my mind. So I oppose the policy.
Thank you.
Mike, can I just ask you a question related to that?
Sure.
If you didn't want it removed, but the issue is that 30 days is difficult to sort of deal with, especially in a transfer environment, what would an operator community feel today would be a reasonable number? 180 days, 365 days?
I don't pretend to speak for an operator community, but I would say that first off, I think in the case of a transfer, there's no difference, because I don't think anyone's suggesting that the 30-day clock starts from when you file the request. I would think we understand that it starts from when you receive the space. So I would think the mechanism by which you acquire the space is somewhat orthogonal to how quickly you might use it. I think things like the size of the space and the nature of your network would be more controlling factors there. But to answer your question, I don't have a particular number in mind. I think people have suggested 90 days. People have suggested other accounts. I do think, though, that we need to be careful because, again, this is all speculative. It's all forward-looking. And we need to, we could remove this and add other language. We could change this term. I'm not suggesting a particular remedy. I simply think removing this term and leaving the door open to anyone who comes in and walks up and says, I want, a /22 and I'm going to use 50% of it in a year. And you should take my word for it. I think that's insufficient.
Thank you.
So I think there are many possible remedies.
Thanks, Mike. Other comments, remote participant? I see someone come from the mic.
Michael Roberts, Switch Co., not speaking for my company, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have a particular view on how it's actually written, but I do think that having a 25% immediate utilization rate and then a 50% utilization rate within a year is sort of nonsensical.
Sorry, it's nonsensical?
It seems silly to require you to use a quarter of your assignment within 1 month,
right,
as long as you then use a subsequent quarter within 11 months. That just doesn't make any sense.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have any suggestions on how that could be improved, or?
No.
That's okay. We're all good. Other comments before I close the microphones? We'll close the microphones now, check for that remote participant, and I'll speak slowly because there can be a bit of delay on webcast. Okay, thank you very much for that and for that input. Just as a small note, by the way, since if you do have an idea or an improvement or suggestion on any of these policies that's either come up after we've closed or you didn't want to come to the microphone, many of the AC members will be in the room at least for a few minutes, so please feel free to come up, grab one of them, and catch their ear. So we'll go into our final proposal of the day, 2015 that's not right, 4, sorry. And I will invite Kevin Bloomberg to come up and discuss the modification of Section 8.2 to better reflect how ARIN handles reorgs. Kevin.
This is on, good. Hello. Okay, so we had a proposal which came to the AC last month, Prop 218. And the minutes, the nice thing is, if you love reading, all of the minutes of the ARIN Advisory Council meetings are published. Usually, I think 5 to 10 days after the meetings, you get to see all of the discussion that goes on between all of the AC members to sort of understand why the AC is saying one thing or another, or doing one thing or another, or moving things forward or moving things backward, etc. So this was Prop 218. And one of the things that was discussed was initially, is this really a policy change, or is this something called an editorial change? An editorial change is where we are saying, or we're asking the community to confirm that what we're changing is really just a typo, or we missed something here, or the numbering of something is wrong. We're just going to fix it. We ask the community, we do a consult, or ARIN does a consultation process just to confirm that. And if everything's good, it's sort of short, side steps and fast tracks through the whole process and goes to the board to get ratified. It's a much simpler policy. And what happened was in 8.2, let's just go over to it, ARIN staff indicated that the procedures should clearly describe how reorganizations. So the word reorganization isn't in the title of the section. So it's in the text of it, but it's not in the title. And so there was some ambiguity in that regard. If all we had done is added that in, then maybe you could say it was editorial, because really is a title, something you need to do. So this policy did a couple things, because why fix one thing when you can fix two? And what it did was it added the word reorganizations to the title. It moved the bullets around a little bit, and it added the text for mergers and acquisition transfers, the recipient entity, to new bullet number 5, to clarify operational practice, what ARIN has been doing for the years, requiring the evidence of transfer of documentation for reorganization. So I'm just going to bring it up here, what we're talking about. Oops, sorry. We add the word reorganizations, and we just add in the explanation for mergers and acquisition transfers. Now, years ago, there weren't that many reorgs that necessarily would have happened. Meaning, your companies would have reorged, and ARIN wouldn't have necessarily been involved. It got forgotten about. But now people are realizing they have to clean up their data. They did a reorganization 10 years ago, and suddenly they realize they have all of this extra space. They want to move that space, transfer it in the 8.3 market, but it wasn't ever reorged into their proper location, so now they're going into ARIN to do reorganizations. So where there wasn't necessarily a need for this cleanup years ago, nobody really thought of it, we're now getting into a situation where people are wanting to clean up their data and which is a really good thing, cleaning up data. So let's move on to the discussion part of it. Do you support updating and just clarifying these couple points? And if not, what changes could be made to this policy that would make you like doing this? So the first question is, do you support this, I guess, is the main thing.
Please, sir.
Hi there.
You were there faster than I was, so.
Donnie Royceman with SoftLayer. So I understand, what's the difference between a reorganization versus a merger and acquisition in the eyes of ARIN in this policy?
Leslie? Let's give her a second to approach the working microphone.
Okay. So a merger and acquisition is when there's been a sale or a merger of corporations. Reorganization, what we've seen typically is an organization that decides to move all of their network operations to their headquarters somewhere, and they've got a bunch of subsidiaries and they want to consolidate and move everything to one place. So they're reorganizing, and we'll allow them to do that, but it doesn't really fit under an M&A because there's no legal documentation per se. It's just what they tell us they're doing. So that's typically what we're seeing when they're consolidating into one location.
So in the case of a reorganization, does the entity have multiple orgs within ARIN, and they're just trying to move them around across existing orgs? What are they trying to do?
They're trying to, yeah. So they'll have 3 or 4 subsidiary companies, and they all have space from ARIN, but they want it all to be in one, in their headquarters, because that's where NetOps is going to be. So they want to move the space from those 4 subsidiaries all into their parent company.
Got it. Okay.
Something like that.
Thanks. I do support definitely changing, adding that to the title. Makes a lot of sense, but I haven't necessarily considered the rest of the bullet change to comment on that part.
Thank you. For fire microphone?
Sure. Kevin Locke with Carpathia again, and Carpathia has gone through, has acquired a number of companies over the years, and then we're in the process of now being acquired by another company. And so I've had some experience doing the merger and acquisition part of this, and I know there's some that we didn't do the merger and acquisition on because they weren't necessary. The entity still exists, so there's not a requirement necessarily to do it. And believe me, we'll avoid that if we can avoid, because it's obviously an onerous process in the merger and acquisition. So anything that would make it easier to keep the ARIN database updated or to consolidate org IDs, which sounds like this would be mostly involved with, is a good thing, and I strongly support that.
Thank you, sir. You can line up though, Mike. It's okay.
Phil Rosenthal from IS Prime. I would echo the same comment that if we want data to be accurate, reducing the friction to having accurate data, it seems like a good idea. And there are quite a number of organizations that if you look at the history of mergers and acquisitions over the last 5 or 10 years, if you look up who owns their AS numbers, their IP space, plenty of it is still in the name of the old organizations, and I think we all understand why it's like that. So anything to reduce friction is a good thing.
Thank you.
Mike Joseph, Google. I support this policy. I think, to be honest, this seems like something of a no-op, because it seems like this is more or less ARIN's behavior today. It seems to clean up the language. I do note that the policy came from a former member of ARIN RSD, so I can only assume that he thinks it's necessary for some reason. But it seems completely sensible to me, so I support the policy as written.
Thank you. I'm going to make a last call for comments. So we've got a remote participation, I believe, or?
Remote participant, Gary Burmester. No affiliation, speaking for myself. I think this is an example of how the NERPM overspecifies ARIN operational practice. While I understand the huge effort to simplify the policy manual is a work in progress, it is long overdue, and I would prefer to see operational practices removed where possible.
Thank you for that. Last caller, we'll close the microphones. Sir, go ahead. So we're going to close the microphones after this one? No. So if you want to approach now, or
Bill,
the microphones are closed with you, sir.
Okay, yes. Bill Goldstein, again, my affiliation is myself speaking for myself. And let me ask a question. When these addresses are provided, is there anything specific in the agreements with ARIN stating that organizations, particularly commercial organizations, acquiring these cannot capitalize them or put them in the books as a depreciable asset?
I would be happy to try and get you an answer. That's sounding a very specific legal, and I would not feel comfortable, but I can get you an answer very shortly on that.
Well, again, I'm
bringing... There is an agreement that every organization that approaches ARIN today to get the registration services agreement. Leslie, are you able to? I don't want to put you on the spot, because that's...
I'm almost positive that the registration services agreement says that IP addresses are not to be considered property. I can look that up and let you know, but fairly sure it's in the agreement.
Yeah, there is. That's a very specific question.
Right.
I'm not a lawyer, nor do I try. And
no, and I was trying to get away from general questions and again, addressing this specific issue. It's just I see, and again, not talking about my prior association or my employer with AT&T, because I have never seen AT&T do this, but I have seen so much dubious trading of IP address space where I read about it or have heard about it from from customers, and the question comes to mind, is it legitimate to do this? Are you really, are you ascribing property rights to something that is not your property?
So perhaps what I can say is that ARIN does maintain a significant legal reserve.
Okay.
And ARIN has actively defended the rights of the community to establish and enforce registry policy. And to date, ARIN has never been ordered or subject to a judgment to do anything other than follow the policies for all resources in the registry. So that has been our position up till now.
Okay, and
it's a significant. It's in fact you can see it on our budget for anybody to see.
No, and that's excellent. I agree with it. But again, perhaps at an appropriate time, it might be worthwhile reviewing some of those agreements with the idea that reserve never has to be addressed or touched.
Okay. Thank you for that input.
I'd like to follow up to that comment real quick, specifically to Leslie's response. While the RSA does specify, I believe, the ARIN's concern about how it considers addresses, I do not believe that the RSA prescribes or proscribes any particular accounting treatment of addresses to entities. Is that consistent with ARIN's expectations?
I'm going to be happy to get you to answer that, because you're asking a very specific question.
I think I know the answer to that, but considering Leslie just answered a question that wasn't quite the answer that was posed, I'd like to make sure that no one from staff believes that the RSA or entities which sign the RSA are agreeing to any particular accounting treatment.
So let's put a pin in that. We're going to go on to the next item, and I will try, if possible, to get a response back. Because I would hate to rush, since it seems that's on everyone's mind. Is there any, I believe we've already closed the mics, but I'll give one last moment for everyone to interject on this one. See none. Thank you, Kevin, for your input. The only other comment I wanted to make that came out of, I guess, a question regarding reclamation and, the, I guess, unused address space. The community has put in place the transfer policy. It seems to be working. And, a lot of times people speak a little bit about, there's all that address space. But just as a reminder, at least at an RIR level, in 2009, there was 11.5/8s allocated between all the RIRs, over 15 in 2010, and over 12 in 2011. So the rate at which the, globally we've been going through address space is quite significant. So large reclamation is probably not going to assist you in IPv6, IPv6, IPv6 people. So with that, I think we will end our policy discussions. Thank you very much all for your input. What we'd like to move into is this last item that I alluded to earlier, which is the future of ARIN public policy consultations. So to give you, which is what we're in right now. So we started this a few years ago. It was as ARIN, both the board and the advisory council and the staff kind of looked at the future of policy. What does policy look like post runout? What's the appropriate number of meetings to have? As we said earlier, we have 2 ARIN meetings a year. The public policy meeting, one in April, which is standalone, and one in October, which is back-to-back with NANOG. And we introduced this concept of public policy consultations in a hope to get better feedback than we had previously been getting from the operator community. But we thought that this would be a great opportunity to just have a discussion. The advisory council has always found these very useful sessions, but we thought that it would be great to have a discussion here on them. And I'm going to turn over to Dan for a second, maybe just to give his view as AC chair on, what the AC finds is useful or not, and what some interesting questions they'd like to know on how we might structure these in the future.
So I guess it's in a way a two-way street, where as much as we find your input valuable from the different perspectives or, implications of the changes, it's also, very helpful for if we know what you would find helpful as far as how a lot of this information is presented. Because with different audiences, talking to government people versus network operators versus number administrators, everybody looks at these topics a little differently, and everyone interprets them a little differently. So we're very interested in not only the information that you can provide us, but how can we change the format of this session or these presentations to either make them more relevant or provide better data to this audience.
So with that, the microphones are open, both remotely and in the room. Again, we need your input on how we get input, so front microphone.
Mike Joseph, Google. I oppose the existence of the PPCs. Let me clarify. So now that I've just warmed myself up to everyone in the room, let me clarify this. There are 5 policy-making meetings a year now. 5. Absurdly, 2 of them happen the same week. That's too many. That's too many for entities who are actively involved in policymaking, for people who are actively involved in policymaking. And I'll point out that in this PPC, we don't have anywhere near the representation from the ARIN AC or the board. We don't even have John Curran present.
He apologizes again.
And I'm sure that's perfectly legitimate, but the point is, we need to decide as a community that we either have We have 2 a year, we have 3 a year, whatever the number is, not 5. But whatever the number is, those are the policy-making forums. And embedding a halfway PPM inside an ARIN agenda that is abysmally attended isn't the way to do it, in my opinion. It means that if you're active in policy, you end up traveling to every NANOG and every ARIN. And it means that if we can see policies come through PPCs and make it to recommended draft without ever having been presented at a PPM. Now, I know that's not our practice normally, but it's not precluded. So I think that having operator outreach is reasonable. I think that having somebody stand up and present to NANOG what current policy efforts are happening in ARIN, I think having ARIN AC members listen to feedback is reasonable. But I think treating this thing as a policy-making meeting, one which can advance and approve policy, is problematic.
Okay. Dan, did you want to ask any follow-up, or?
No, it's very clear what he said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now the ball is rolling. Others that want to come and, please, sir.
Matt Petak. This time I'm going to speak just for myself. Following up to Mike Joseph's comments, electrifying as they were, I am a little curious from the ARIN perspective, is there a requirement that the April meeting be standalone? Would one thing that could be considered be to do 2 joint meetings a year with NANOG and just say, okay, it seems to work well in October. You have considerably higher participation when you smush things together there. Could we maybe do like 2 meetings jointly and we only travel like twice and cut down that 5 meetings to like 2 major meetings and do it that way?
So that's a great question. So yes, the October has always been back-to-back. The April has generally been standalone to give a little bit of flexibility so that, and ARIN has tried several times to sometimes line up with other meetings or organizations, such as CARIB-NOG or the Canadian ISP organizations, because our region, being the Canada, the United States, and a large amount of the Caribbean and other properties in our region, we just want to make sure that we had the ability to, traditionally had the ability to visit those regions if NANOG was not able to get that. But there's no requirement, and that's a great suggestion that we could look at in the future. That's just been the traditional. Leslie, did you want to add something? I'm sorry, we have to jump here because we got the mic. We just all get cozy there.
Sorry, yeah, this is annoying. Sorry. So I just want to point out, Matt, somebody just said we don't have John Curran present. I just want you to know John Curran is alive and well and watching everything we say.
Not only that, he's...
Hi, John.
Not only that, he has a message for you all later, but we'll get to that later. Sorry, John.
No.
Don't do that.
Okay.
Any other comments on this format, or?
Well, I was going to reply.
Oh, sorry.
To Matt's, or add to that. As well. One of the things that we have to consider as well is part of the policy development process is for us to bring something through a recommended state and actually recommend it to the board. We do have to present it at a public meeting. So if we went to a format where there was a considerable gap between those meetings, say like a joint, January NANOG and the fall, because there is no NANOG meeting in April, there would be a considerable gap where if we had a problem arise that we really needed to move through the process a little quicker, we would either have to leverage our emergency procedures, which gets the board involved. So I'm not saying that it's a bad idea or it's impossible, it's just things that we have to take into consideration.
Thank you. I believe sorry.
Me, whoever you want.
Let's go rear microphone,
okay.
Then we'll.
Tony Tauber speaking as NANOG Program Committee Chair. So, and I've discussed this with Dan and Kevin. I know we had a chat several weeks ago anyway, kind of about this going forward, and sort of that's how some of this discussion happened. But so just a bit about how the NANOG Program Committee does its thing, which is we take submissions, we put out a call for presentations, we take submissions, we go through and assess their relevance to our audience. And, there was basically we're revisiting everything, which is part of why this discussion is going on. So I want people to know, I mean, I think, the critique of having two things in the same week, two PPCs in the same week where...
PPC and a PPM.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Similar discussions.
Yes, very similar discussions.
Same content, similar format. I don't think that's going to happen again because people were frustrated by it. But in general, we're revisiting everything. So it's not a less people think of it as a carve out or a permanent fixture of the way things are. To have PPC embedded in NANOG is going to follow our program development methodology. So just so people here know, because a lot of the interested parties, they should realize that. And just when Dan was talking about, well, something has to be presented in public, I mean, it just occurred to me, well, obviously you've got a remote participation framework, right? Or, that's understood to be a way to do it, So can there be a constitution of a public meeting that isn't physical? Just a thought.
It's a great comment. Just as my own comment, thank you very much. The program committee has been very supportive of what has been an experiment and now starting to has been quite a fixture for a bit. So we appreciate that quite a bit.
Just to respond to that, and I'll see if I can appropriately capture John Curran here. We're always looking at possible revisions to the policy development process, and we've had conversations in the past a number of times about can procedures move forward without actually coming to a PPM meeting. So all of these are definitely viable possibilities or conversations to be had, and the policy development process is always looked at, I believe, by the board, and I think John keeps a running tally of points as they come up. So
yeah, I detailed it later. For instance, the historical reason why it's been the one joint knot, but just because that's the way it's been done does not mean that it's the way it has to be done in the future. And that's one of the reasons. One of this discussion, we'll continue to have it at our PPMs and such like that. We're always looking to what the community feels is the most effective way to do this.
Great.
So one thing to sort of add to this, and this is, I guess, part of the community over the years that we've noticed as an advisory council, is that things get done in person. We have a couple interesting ways of describing it, but until you get up to a mic, nothing gets said. We don't have we have an active mailing list, but nowhere near active like you're used to with the NANOG mailing list, where you can have hundreds of messages suddenly flurry in because somebody said one wrong word. So the nice thing about the PPCs is it allows us to move discussion forward because people are actually in a room discussing. And if we leave it to a virtual space, unfortunately I find that doesn't happen. I think there's lots of use for virtual spaces, but I think the benefit for me as an AC member of having these meetings is that, we don't have to now wait till October to make the changes that a number of people have brought up in this room that will benefit these policies. It's not necessarily let's dump the policy, it's not let's move it forward, let's work on it. And this meeting allows us to do that.
Thank you. Front microphone. Sorry, unless you had any further comments? Thank you, sir.
Joe Provo, working for Google, speaking for myself. Whatever we do, let's not repeat Baltimore because that PPM felt like a marathon session.
Thank you. We're going to close the microphones now, so if you wish to add on this item, please approach a microphone with high speed. Any remote participants, by the way? None?
Oh, yes.
We'll go to the remote participant then, and then go to our rear microphone.
Kevin Ott, virtual spaces can be made to work, but the tools will need to be improved. Real time is necessary, video possibly. Some people just can't make the travel happen.
Thank you, sir. Rear microphone.
Matt Poundset, speaking for myself. I think in terms of keeping the operator community informed about what the policy community is thinking about and working on, and for getting information to the AC if the AC finds it useful, I think for those two things, the January and June PPC is great.
I think the October PPC is a little bit silly. However, I agree with Mike. I don't think using these meetings as a place to actually move things forward in the process is a good idea. It's poor. This is a poor replacement of a full PPM, right? It's does certain things very well, but as a substitute for a PPM, I don't think it's good. And yeah, so.
Thank you. And our last two comments.
John Springer, Inland Telephone, ARIN AC, not speaking for Inland Telephone, not speaking for the ARIN AC, but speaking as a single member of the ARIN AC. These PPCs are very useful for me because I get to speak to a category of people that do not show up to the PPM. And not only that, but on those occasions when I do speak, I get to speak in the presence of these people so that they hear me speak and I occasionally hear them speak. The idea that, I mean, travel is travel and it's hard to some extent on all of us, but the idea that it would be desirable for the AC to not receive input from those people who only attend NANOGs is not one that I would be comfortable with. Also, with regard to the October PPC, that would be the one that I would be the most likely to consider throwing off the back of the sled.
Okay, thank you. Supposed to be last comment, but Mike looks like he's sneaking in. But it's all right, Mike. It's all right. No, we did, but it's all right. It's okay. We've got a bit extra time.
Matt Pitek again, speaking for myself and not completely understanding the subtle distinction between PPC versus PPM. I'm going to ask a dumb question.
There are no dumb questions, but I might give you a dumb answer.
Excellent. Rather than kind of wedgie sandwiching this thing in the middle of NANOG, would you guys be open to considering maybe having, rather than the 3-day massive meeting in October, doing like 1-day follow-on at the end of each of the 3 NANOGs to do kind of shorter PPMs that are actual like meetings versus
don't do the so you're suggesting don't do this kind of bit within the
don't do it within NANOG, but have it the same hotel, same place.
And
so
see
that
if NANOG would be cooperative, because it is obviously their meeting to doing
those of us who are passionate about policy could stay the extra day. We've already flown. It's just one more hotel night. And then we get the more immersive, just full day, oh my God, microphone experience, which you know we just all live for. And this way, you actually don't have to worry about feeling like it's getting cut down to even fewer opportunities. This way, you have three whole opportunities during the year to get that community feedback in an in-depth sort of just, oh, we really dig in mode.
I have to say, sir, the way that's spoken is why we have in-person meetings, because you know, how could you capture that in an email?
Thank you.
That's a wonderful suggestion. If anybody would like to approach the mics, we'll do one last call since I might not have been thinking. Mike, go ahead. So please approach while Mike is making a comment if you'd like to speak.
Mike Joseph, Google. I'd like to just respond to John Springer's comment. I'll point out that we don't send the AC to PPCs. If we really want to get operator feedback to the AC, we should send them. We should fund AC and board travel, and we should make it with all the bells and whistles that we do, if that's what we want to do. It's that we get some people here. We have substitute presenters because the shepherds aren't here. We have, we have a room that's a quarter of the size, if we're lucky, of a PPM, and particularly people on stage that are a quarter of the number of people that we would normally have. So if we're going to do something, let's do it right.
All right, thank you. I would address that there is some support for, but you're quite right. We don't support the entire AC and board, but we do support
But if we really think that it's important, we
understood.
should.
No, your point's made. I just want to say that some of the AC and board do come here on support. But I get your point. You would like all if it's going to be.
If it's going to be real, let's make it real.
Dan, I don't know if you wanted to have any closing comments or.
Well, just that this has all been very helpful because in all of the conversations I've probably ever been in with this topic, nobody I've never heard anybody say, this is a done deal or, we've got this right. So I think each time we've had these, it's been a work in progress. And whether that work in progress results in us doing away with these or Whether it results in us refining them in some other fashion, remains to be seen. But all of the information that's been provided here has been very helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, not just on this session, but the input on all the sessions. To go back quickly before we wrap up, John called me on the weekend saying that he had something come up and couldn't travel, but I said, no problem. I'm sure nothing will come up that will require you. But he was able to remotely participate. So I'd just like to respond to the earlier question. And John Curran has asked me to say, the RSA and LRSA do not specify accounting treatment for number resources. The RSA and LRSA do require the address holder to agree that the number resources are not property, that they will not assert property rights against the resources, and that they will comply with the registry's policies. My apologies for delaying that. I'm just going to leave it at that, if that's all right. Thank you, as I was pretty sure that was it, but it's given that there seemed to be some fairly specific, I thought it was good to let John just quickly, since he's at a terminal, verify. Just a reminder, as you probably guessed, we will have a PPM in October, back-to-back with NANOG. So in Montreal, as you know, so please do try and attend. If you'd like to become involved and you're not already, please consider joining the ARIN and PPML mailing list. And I believe, unfortunately, I think he had run it, the fellowship program has closed for, we do offer a fellowship to attend ARIN PPMs, which when it is back-to-back with the NANOG, we also do pick up the NANOG cost. So if you're interested in doing that, please visit our website. But with that, one last comment from Kevin.
No, just the comment you touched on earlier that, a number of us will remain behind. So if there are people that want to discuss certain aspects of this proposal or any other topic for that matter, just let us know.
Okay. And with that, thank you very much all for your involvement in this PPC, and have a great day. Thanks.